Reminder, gala tickets are now available. You can go pick them up at any time from the registration booth out in the front tents. And yes, we have 5 gala tickets available for purchase. So there are 5 openings at the gala tomorrow night. If you'd like to purchase a ticket, the value is $199 plus tax. Maybe not. I don't know. No tax. So $199. So if you'd like to purchase a ticket, see Alyssa or go to the registration desk. Our next speaker is Clayton Mowry. He is the president and chairman of Arianespace. He's been there since 2001. Now I'm giving you a warning. He's a very dynamic speaker. So please keep your arms and legs inside the seated area at all times. Enjoy. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ooh, that's really loud. I got to pull that back. Thank you to the Space Frontier Foundation and the organizers for inviting me out to speak here today. I appreciate the invitation. I'm not quite sure why I'm here, to be honest with you. I'm in the, I don't know if it's new space or old space or maybe in between space business, because what we do is traditional commercial launches of commercial telecommunication satellites. It's really the bulk of what Arianespace does. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the markets that we serve, where the commercial space industry is from our perspective, and maybe some of the trends that are out there. So it's going to be a little bit different than what you've been hearing, I think, over the last day and a half. You know, it's always at my peril that I'm speaking first after lunch and second after Jim Muncie talking about settlement in space. So this is going to be sporty. Hopefully I'll be able to keep your interest and you'll learn something. I think it was Ken Davidian that said yesterday that in a typical PowerPoint presentation, you're going to only remember 5% of what I'm going to say over the next 30 minutes. So maybe I can up the quotient a little bit to 6 or 7% by keeping your interest. I'm from New York, so I talk really fast. And I try to slow myself down, but if you can keep up, I'm going to force you to try to keep up with the pace of this, okay? I have to give you a little bit of a commercial about Arianespace first, because they won't pay for my plane ticket to come out and speak at something like this unless I talk about the company. So quick 2 slides. When I'm done with that, I can really get into the content. Arianespace is 30 years old, 31 in fact, world's first commercial space transportation company. We've launched over 200 times. We have Flight 203 on the pad. It's going to be flying on August the 5th. So far we've put 294 payloads into orbit. That's over 50% of the commercial satellites that are in operation today in geostationary orbit. So we are the market leader in that. We're very proud of our track record. We're serving 8 national and international space agencies. We launch from the launch facilities in French Guiana, which is on the north coast of South America, just north of Brazil, a couple hundred miles north of the mouth of the Amazon River, about 5 degrees off the equator. It's a great launch zone there. We maximize the Earth's rotational force to place satellites into geostationary transfer orbit. And it's basically, it's Department of France. So you're launching from Europe, believe it or not, when you launch from down there. We're operating, we're going to soon to be operating 3 vehicles. We've been operating for many years now, over 20 years, the Ariane 5, which is our workhorse vehicle. We do launches in dual launch mode. So typically we'll launch 2 telecommunication satellites at the same time. A large one, about 6 tons, and a smaller one around 3 tons. And we'll launch about 6 times a year with the Ariane 5. So when you do dual manifesting, you 10 to 12 payloads a year. We're also doing launches of the automated transfer vehicle to the International Space Station. So those are about 20 metric tons flying to the space station orbit. We're going to be soon operating on October the 20th, our first launch of 2 Galileo satellites, which is the European version of GPS. We're going to be launching those on a Soyuz rocket. And the Soyuz rocket, as you probably, if you're space people, you know what the Soyuz is. It's been launching for many, many times. 1,774 flights to date, I believe, on Soyuz. It's one of the world's most reliable and capable launch systems. And we're going to be bringing that down to French Guiana to launch that this fall. So we're very proud of that. It's been a long effort, but we're very interested in having that happen. And then we have the Light Vega launcher that's coming online at the end of the year, probably December time frame. And that's a light launcher more in like a Taurus class vehicle, if you want to compare it to a US system. And that'll be doing mostly scientific missions to low Earth orbit. And it's been developed by a consortium out of Italy. It's a 4-stage vehicle, and we're looking forward to upgrading our launch rates. So we've been doing about 6 missions a year with Ariane 5, and then with these other 2 vehicles, we should be launching about 10 to 12 times per year. what do we do as a launch services company? Well, we're providing end-to-end customer service to satellite operators around the world, space agencies. So we're involved everywhere from contract signature all the way up to when we release a satellite into space. We're buying the launch vehicles. We're looking at the quality of the vehicles that we're buying. We're doing the mission analysis. We're providing financial assistance to our customers. We're doing schedule assurance programs for them. So it's quite involved. We're very proud of our track record. Ariane 5 has launched 44 times in a row successfully over the last 8 years, and we're still the market leader, so we must be doing something right. Okay, pop quiz. Who's this guy? Anybody? Give you a hint? Arthur C. Clarke, very good. Okay, Arthur C. Clarke. He was an RAF radar technician. He turned to author and science fiction writer. In 1945, he authored an article in Wireless World magazine entitled Extraterrestrial Relays, Can Rocket Stations Give Worldwide Radio Coverage? And there's a little vision of the drawing he put up there. And basically what he said at the time was, 3 orbital locations, you can basically see the whole planet from geostationary orbit, 22,300 miles, roughly 36,000 kilometers. You can see the whole planet from there. And you could cover it with signals, and you could broadcast signals down to the Earth like a really tall radio tower, right, back to Earth. This was a really novel concept in 1945. People were not thinking about this, right? This was the birth of the commercial satellite industry. Okay? He also, in 1954, 9 years later, wrote a letter to the guy who was the head of the Weather Bureau in the United States and said, you know what, satellites could actually probably do some stuff for you in weather. And that guy went on, Dr. Harry Wexler, to be the chief advocate of launching weather satellites. So he was also helpful in starting that piece of the industry. And then he's probably more well-known, though, for 2001: A Space Odyssey. And he collaborated with Stanley Kubrick on that film and script, and was considered one of the big 3 science fiction writers with Asimov and Heinlein. This guy, anybody? I'll give you $10 if you can guess who he is. Nobody? Chief engineer at AT&T Bell Labs? Nobody? JPL? Developed the first transistor? Nobody knows any of the cool guys from commercial space, right? No. No. He developed the first TWITA, traveling wave tube amplifier. His name is John Pierce. If you go and look at him on the web, it's a fascinating story to read how basically he developed one of the first commercial satellites that were out there. There was basically 3 at the time. There was Telstar, Syncom, and Early Bird in the very early days. This is the very early 1960s, late 50s, early 60s. He actually considered, if you read his memoirs, that they went to Air Force and NASA about launching this satellite, and he actually really considered launching and building his own rocket to launch it into space because he didn't want to wait for these guys to launch it. They actually talked to the Russians about launching it, and then they figured, politically, probably not a good idea if we launch with the Russians in the 60s. They ended up launching it on a Delta rocket in 1962 for $3 million, which is an insanely low price today. I would never sell you a launch for $3 million. Okay, one other guy. Anybody? Give you a hint. Founded the Spanish International Network. It's a good acronym, right, for a television network. Sold it for $80 million to Hallmark. And he started a company called Pan Am Sat. And this guy basically, on his own, bought a commercial satellite, which at the time was crazy. Nobody did that as an individual. Nobody went and bought their own satellite and launched it into space. And he was going up against Intelsat, right, which was this huge international treaty organization that was doing international traffic between continents on satellites. He ended up eventually selling the company to a group of investors, and then to Intelsat. In fact, actually owns it now, his satellite fleet. At one point, they merged with the Hughes satellite fleet, but they ended up selling it for $4 billion. At the time he was starting this, it was not allowed to be able to compete with Intelsat on the international side. So he took out full-page ads in the Washington Post, in the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal with a cartoon character of a dog named Spot. And he would address these, and he would write open letters to President Ronald Reagan at the time saying, hey, you got to let me compete with this big international treaty-based organization. I'm just this small guy. I'm buying my own satellite. I'm going to launch it into space. And this was his logo. I'm not kidding. It's the dog. the dog relieving itself, and his logo, and on the corporate literature, and I have a poster hanging over my desk with this on it, is truth and technology will triumph over and bureaucracy. And it was an amazing story that this guy built the thing from scratch. He basically was, in these cartoons, they would have him as sort of like Don Quixote tilting at windmills. And this guy basically took on Intelsat, built the company, and ended up selling it and becoming a billionaire because of it. So it can be done in commercial space as well. So let me give you a little bit of context on the commercial satellite industry where I work. So telecommunications industry at large, $4 trillion marketplace, huge, huge. The space industry at large, which includes both government and commercial space, $276 billion. So you put space in context with telecommunications. Satellites, commercial satellites, $168 billion. All right, so we're getting smaller and smaller. The services piece of the satellite industry and the ground equipment piece, $153 billion. So that's like 90% of commercial space. Satellite manufacturing, I can't even read the number, $10.8 billion. You're getting even smaller. And launch, which a lot of the people that here have been talking about for the last couple days, right? And you're going to continue to talk about low-cost access to space. You're talking about my business, the launch industry. That's only $4.3 billion. So contrast that to the telecommunications industry. You look at our industry by segment, and as I mentioned, roughly 90% is services and ground equipment. So this just gives you an idea of how we fare. Now, the industry's been growing over the past several years, robust growth, and it's been driven. I'll talk a little bit about the market drivers that are out there. By the way, this is sourced from the Satellite Industry Association. Futron Corporation puts together their numbers every year with an annual survey of the satellite industry, and they do a great job trying to track the industry and the growth numbers for the commercial segment. When you look at that services piece, which is the big, big piece that's driving the industry, and I know this is a little bit hard to see, but the big green bar right here, consumer satellite services. This is DBS service, this is DirecTV, this is the Dish network. This is services that are going direct to a consumer. That is really what is driving the business. The fixed piece, the little blue bar, is more video delivery of video channels to cable head ends to do programming distribution. Then you've got the mobile satellite pieces, which is like Inmarsat, Iridium, and Globalstar, and then the remote sensing piece, right? So you have GOI and Digital Globe and a couple other players out there, Spotimage and a couple others that are doing the remote sensing piece. But really what the driver is, what I'm trying to show you is consumer satellite services are the big driver in our business. Ground equipment, again, the big blue bar, the 44 billion bar, is consumer equipment. So that's the little set-top box and the dish on your house. And then you've got the network business, which is the big satellite networks and distribution networks, which is a much smaller piece. Why is it growing so fast? It's growing fast because of high-definition television, right? High-definition television sops up a tremendous amount of bandwidth compared to the old standard analog TV. Now, back when I started my career working at the Commerce Department as a satellite and launch industry analyst, so I probably sound like an analyst talking to you with numbers. So back in the day when we were looking at this, and it was one channel with an analog, and sometimes you could get 3 channels of analog on one transponder. And then digital compression came along, and so you had to encode the signal on the ground, send it up, and then decode it on the other side. And actually, that guy, Rene Anselmo, that I mentioned before, he was a big driver for doing this, using digital compression technology. And all of a sudden, you could get 5 or 6 or 7 to 1 compression ratio. So in that same amount of bandwidth that you were using, you could put 7 channels distributed over that. Then they even got to a phase where they were doing 15 and 16 channels in that same amount of bandwidth with compression. Now with HD, you got to dial that all the way back down because you've got a heck of a lot more data that's going over that same stream, so it's sopping up more bandwidth. And so now it's more, Jeff Faust, what is it, like 3:4 to 1 now, I think, for HD, roughly. But it's really been driving a lot of the growth in the capacity in the marketplace. 67% of the households in the U.S., you probably, guys at home, probably have an HD-capable TV in your house. Televisions are migratory, by the way. The old analog ones probably in your attic or in your basement, and the nice HD ones in your living room, right? That's how they work. They migrate through the home over the years. So that's really what's the driver. And what's going to happen is what we think is the majority of that growth has been in the U.S. so far, in the Americas, in the U.S. and Latin America. But there's tremendous potential for growth with HD in other parts of the world. And we think that's going to continue to drive demand for new satellites and new satellite capabilities and systems. So we see a robust future for the commercial space business. So 90% of commercial space is communications, DirecTV and things like Wild Blue, Hughes Network Systems, a company in Carlsbad, California here, Viasat's going to be launching a big broadband satellite soon. And less than 10% of that is other types of data streams. So matching up GPS with satellite imagery and being able to do things like Google Earth, right? Which is pretty amazing that now when we do anywhere we're going to go to Google first, or we're going to go to MapQuest, and we're going to look at the satellite image and see what's there and check out and map out our route. And that's all enabled by satellites, right? Because you're using different pieces of that of the industry to put that together. Future commercial space, maybe you guys have all been talking about tourism, be it orbital, suborbital types of ventures, maybe science that's going to drive some of that, maybe energy, solar power from space, or biomedical applications with the space station and other platforms. So there's a lot of other things that are out there as potentials. But really what we're talking about is applications driven, right? Space is really just a platform that's way up there. You're using a very high tower to be able to do things, or zero gravity to be able to do things. So you have to think about it in terms of that. So when you think about what's driving all this content, it's really all about these applications here on the ground. And when I started doing this 17, 18 years ago, a lot of this stuff didn't exist. We were hopeful. We saw things like GPS. I mean, the guys who invented the GPS satellite system didn't think about it. They were thinking about targeting a bomb, right? A precision-guided munition. They weren't thinking about you and me having it on our cell phones. But I can remember talking to the guys back in the day at the GPS Industry Council, and we kept saying, the chips are going to get smaller, chips are going to get cheaper, everybody will have it on their cell phone. We'll all be able to work. Yeah, now you can sit there and walk around downtown San Jose or Paris or wherever you are, and all right, I'm like looking at the phone, and here it is. I'm using the GPS receiver, and I'm figuring out exactly where I am. So that's really where we're going to continue to see growth. It's a very international business I'm in. Here's just a slate of Arianespace customers, and there's more customers than this that are out there, but I put the flags on there just to give you an idea of the kind of customer base we're dealing with. When you come down to French Guiana for a launch, please come down to French Guiana for a launch. It's really cool to watch the Ariane 5 take off, or any of the other vehicles we're going to be flying down there. Invite you to come down and take a look at it. It's like a little United Nations down there. Typically, we're launching 2 satellites. One of them is going to be built by one of the European manufacturers. The other one's probably built by an American manufacturer. We're probably launching from one guy in Asia, another guy in the Middle East. We've got launch teams from all over Europe there. We've got insurance providers. We've got all kinds. And you're down there, and it's like there's 40 different nationalities standing around you watching this rocket take off, which is a little bit different than what we're doing. I mean, the space station, obviously, international cooperation, but it's a little more difficult, I think, in the government side to be able to achieve that kind of cooperation that we're doing on a routine basis down there because it is commercial. What's happening in the commercial satellite world? Somebody asked me this at lunch. They said, now, are satellites continuing to get bigger? And I said, I'm going to show you a slide. I'm going to prove it to you. They're getting much, much bigger. So you look back at the beginning, SYNCOM 1, 1961. Tiny little satellite, 39 kilograms, 2 transponders, 2 watts. Evolution, 1974, so fast forward 13 years. We're up to 300 watts and 12 transponders, still a pretty small spacecraft. Getting into the 90s, all of a sudden, we're now at 2.7 metric tons, and we're up to 2 kilowatts of power. Fast forward to last year, EchoStar, which is the Dish Network company, Charlie Ergen, they launched a satellite with nearly 6.4 metric tons, 103 transponders, 16 kilowatt power on the payload. It's really a 20 kilowatt satellite. It's a huge spacecraft, built just down the road here, by the way, in Palo Alto by Space Systems Loral. Great company, good provider, and we love launching their satellites. What's going to happen, right? We're going to continue to see that growth. Where it's limited right now is by the size of the launch capability. Now, we launch in a dual launch mode, so theoretically, we could be launching a 9-point-something ton satellite if somebody was willing to buy it and launch it that way. But you'd need the spectrum at that location coordinated to be able to do it. So we haven't been able to push people, but where you're pushing right now at 6.4 tons is really the limit in our upper position on the Ariane 5 or on the Proton, which is my biggest competitor, which is flown by ILS. In addition to seeing all that, and it's all driven by power, right? You're trying to get more and more power to the satellite, and you're using higher and higher frequency bands. Now, the higher that you go up in the radio spectrum, the problem is that you face rain fade, right? You're trying to come down, and the radio waves are getting more and more compressed. You can put more data on it, but you're also more susceptible to hitting clouds, hitting weather, and you're sitting there watching your DirecTV and it goes out and you're like, oh man, I hate satellite TV. But it doesn't really happen. I have DirecTV at home, and very, very rarely will I lose it in a thunderstorm or snowstorm. Very, very rarely. And why is that? Because they're now able to, with these big satellites, to shift the power. And then they can see a thunderstorm that's happening in Florida, and they basically just crank up the power on the beam that's covering Florida, and they go and power right through it. So they've been able to do quite a bit with that technology, and also the digital compression I mentioned before, although they're probably getting closer to reach the limits on the compression side. I'm not sure they're going to achieve as great leaps that they're going to be that they did in the past with compression, but we'll see. It's all done by algorithms. If you're a math major, that's a good business to be in. So the satellites are getting bigger. We did a study with the Tory group last year, showed that over about the past decade, the mass commercial satellites has increased by 26%. So again, theoretical limit. I don't know how big it's going to go. And by the way, the small satellites keep getting big too. Our friends at Orbital Sciences that build small satellites, they started about 2.5, 2.6. They're now like 3.2. So they're getting bigger too on the smaller side. So the trend is upward. Launches, though, more or less steady. We haven't seen a huge demand in new launch capability. On the GEO side of the market, it's roughly about 20 per year. And this slide, again, from the Tory group, actually, this is from the FAA, excuse me. So we put two pieces of data together. One was the price per kilogram, which is for launch, dropped steeply at the beginning of the decade, and then it sort of leveled out, more or less, at roughly price per kilogram of US dollars of about $20,000 per kilogram. And then you see sort of a bumpy ride. 2001 was a terrible year in the commercial satellite industry. That's the year I took the job at Arianespace, so it was really bad. But we got through it, and now we're back in that sort of 15, 20 range. We expect the market, I think the next one, yeah. This is a number of forecasts. So we have Teal Group, Euroconsult, ComStack, Forecast International, and we showed what the average is in terms of launch rates for GEO satellites. Now, should we get new applications, should we get new types of capabilities out there, maybe we'll see some more. In fact, I was just out at Loral yesterday talking to some of the people, and they said they have a rash of RFPs right now that they've got to respond to. So maybe we're hopeful. We all thought there might be a lull after the big replacement markets for some of the big operators like Intelsat and SES, but now there seems to be a whole number of new businesses that want to launch, DBS included, to different regions of the world. So we think that there's some things going on. Some of the other trends that are out there right now, I don't know if you've heard of this concept of hosted payloads, but basically, it takes a long time to build and launch a dedicated government satellite system. So if you're the Department of Defense or the NRO or NASA, it's going to be 8 years, maybe 10 years to build a spacecraft. It's going to cost you billions of dollars. And boy, oh boy, then you got to go pay for the launch. And if you talk to the guys at ULA, they'll say an average is something like 8 years from contract signature to launch. It's a long time and it's expensive. Now contrast that to the budget crisis we have going on in Washington right now, and the pressure to try to save money and do more. Now up steps the commercial satellite industry. Hey guys, we could host that capability. You got a test sensor, you got augmented capability you want to provide, you got something else you want to do, we'll host you on our satellite. You come ride with us, and we'll dramatically reduce the price for launch, and we'll dramatically reduce your program cost, and we'll get you up there within 2 or 3 years, because that's a typical time frame for us. Is 3 years from contract signature to launch, 2 years. For a company like Orbital, they can do it in 2 years. So we've done some of those types of launches before. We launched Arianespace launched the WAS payload for the FAA, and we're going to be launching something called the Commercially Hosted Infrared Payload, CHIRPS, on an orbital-built satellite. It's an infrared test sensor for missile warning, built by SAIC on an orbital platform for SES, based in Luxembourg. We'll be launching that in October. So this is a new trend. We see a lot of stuff in expanding requirements there, and we think it's going to be something that's going to increase. And this is the other thing I joke a lot about with my friends in the industry. I say, we should all be wearing T-shirts that say "We love drones" on it. So drones, UAVs, you see these things, right? I mean, in the wars that we're fighting, in the conflicts that the United States and the Allies are in, you see these things all over the place. They're ubiquitous, right? And it started with the Gulf War, and now here we are today with tremendous amounts of space-based capability. Now, if you can see down here, this is a Global Hawk on the left and a Predator on the right. What's under the big hump on the front of the UAV? It's a satellite dish, right? You got all these sensors looking down, full-time video, high def, and on the top of the thing, you got a satellite dish. And there's only one way to get that data off the UAV. And you got some guy in Las Vegas, right, at the Air Force Base flying it with a joystick, and you got generals in theater looking at the video stream, maybe even combat commanders that are looking at the video stream, making decisions based on that. So we love drones because they're taking capacity off of satellites, and a lot of that capacity is being carried on commercial spacecraft, and they're using it. And so this is a tremendous driver for the future. And even as we pull out of some of these theaters, the use of drones is going to keep increasing. And at least that's what's expected. What I've been told by the analysts and the people who run the companies, we expect more and more drones to be up there and operating. So these are tremendous for the satellite industry. So a few trends to wrap up here. Hopefully am I on time? Over? I'm doing all right? I'll take questions, yeah. So a few trends. Growth in HD and 3D television is going to continue to be a driver in our industry. That's what we expect to see. A number of channels, hockey stick, going to continue to grow. Sometimes I joke you can get into the most niche channel you can imagine, right? I mean, who thought there'd be the home and garden television channel or the gay cowboy dancing channel? Don't write that, Jeff, in your tweet. You can basically think of any channel you can imagine, right? The colonization of space channel, right? And somebody's going to come up and develop a channel for it in HD. It's going to be driven by consumer applications. So you guys are here in the heart of Silicon Valley. If you can think about the next great application of marrying some sort of HD or 3D technology with GPS data and something that's going to make my life easier, have at it, because it's going to be more bandwidth for more commercial satellites. We continue to see the size and power and growth of commercial satellites. There's a lot of discussion now about trends for ion propulsion, electric propulsion on spacecraft. Maybe that'll be able to take off some of the fuel on spacecraft, but still we think that they're going to fill that capacity up with more electronics, more power for the spacecraft, so that you're going to continue to see size and growth. UAVs operated, what I just talked about, and hosted payloads. So these are the big trends, and international is going to be, I think, the increasing growth driver as you see limits in the market saturation in some of the markets that are more mature in Europe and the United States, that we're going to see tremendous growth outside. And I'll just wrap up with one more anecdote. So a year and a half ago, I was flying down to Guyana for the launch of a satellite for one of our customers that one of the, it's sort of a condo sat. So they had different transponder groups sold to different places. And one of the things they sold was direct-to-home satellite TV in India. And I'm talking to the two guys that are launching the program. And I said, look, I've been subscribing to DirecTV for 15 years. When I started, I had to buy the box for like $600, and have this professional guy go and put it on my roof. And I pay like $100 a month for my DirecTV, and I love it. Don't get me wrong, I love it. But how does somebody in India afford that? There's no way they can afford that. How are you doing it? How are you rolling out service in India? And I said, are you buying like the old boxes that we're getting rid of in the United States and refurbishing them and putting them in Indian household? I mean, how do you even do the billing and marketing of this thing? How do you even do the back office end of how you would set up a system like that? And the guy said, you got to rethink how you're thinking about the market. We looked at some of those used boxes. There's no way. They're too expensive to rehab and ship. But we can go to China, we can go to Korea, we can go to Vietnam, and we can buy them today for about 30 or 40 bucks for the set-top box and the dish together. Okay? Then they go and they sell these things, right? Go get them installed. Okay? So they got no phone line. If any of you have satellite TV, you usually have to plug in the phone jack. These people don't have phone lines. But guess what they do? They have a cell phone. So the cell phone is used to do all the billing and back office, right, of the system. You want to order a cricket match in India? Punch in the thing on your cell phone, goes to the satellite company, goes to satellite, decrypted to what your box number is, set up with your phone account. You get the cricket match for however many rupees it is. It's amazing. Average revenue per month for one of those things is $4 or $5 a month. $4 or $5 compared to the $100 a month I'm paying DirecTV. But they can make money at it because the box is so cheap and there's no back office. They run it all through a cell phone. That's how they pay for it. Right? And the people are paying their cell phones probably not with a credit card, but probably actually going and physically paying somebody the contract for the cell phone. So if you can rethink about how the business model works, particularly in a developing country, there's a lot of applications where you can use satellites to do things that you wouldn't be able to do before. So thank you for your attention, and I'll take questions. No questions, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Clay.